Batman Forever is having a little bit of a resurgence at the moment. Back in the day, this flick, but especially its sequel Batman and Robin, was criticised as being the death knell for Batman's cinematic escapades in its totality. With its bold colour palette, focus on camp theatrics and kid-friendly tone, to some killing the superhero entirely. However, it's for all of those exact elements that it's become so embraced all these years later. And there are plenty of interesting facts surrounding this flawed gem that make it even more fascinating. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 20 things you didn't know about Batman Forever. Number 20. Robin Williams was too bitter to participate. When it was first announced that a Batman movie was being made, there was a frenzy of actors chomping at the bit for roles. Most notably, Robin Williams was actively campaigning for the role of the Joker in Tim Burton's 1989 film, feeling a connection to the role. Later, however, he learned that producers had their hearts set on Jack Nicholson, who had initially refused. Consequently, they had pushed Williams forward as bait to actually attract Nicholson back to the role, a casting decision they were so devoted to they ensured top billing. When Williams, of course, learned that he was just being dangled like a shiny object in front of a dog, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. So when he was approached more seriously for Batman Forever to play the Riddler, a role for which he'd infinitely be more well suited to, he outright refused without an apology from the studio for past behaviour that just never came. Number 19. Mickey Dolenz was up for the Riddler. Tim Burton has always been inventive with casting, well, unless he's having a particularly lazy Sunday and just thinks, screw it, I'll get Johnny Depp again. So it's no surprise that, before backing away from the project, he had some out there ideas for who should play Edward Nygma, aka the Riddler. It's also easy to forget that vocalist and drummer for the Monkees, Mickey Dolenz, got his part as a child actor on a show called Circus Boy. It's even more difficult to recall that the Monkees themselves, at the height of their popularity, actually had their own weekly sitcom. Well, you don't need to remember, because Burton certainly did, and actually wanted to bring Mickey back to the screen once again as none other than the Riddler. Number 18. Jim Carrey wanted a question mark carved into his head, but felt the judge might not approve. When it was darker in tone, the Riddler was intended to have a shaved head with a large question mark engraved in his brow. Jim Carrey himself was on board with the decision, and even reportedly looked forward to taking his career to places outside of Ace Ventura. He was, however, going through divorce proceedings during shooting, and feared that he might not appear to be the most stable individual in court if he was decked out in this Riddler look. You could always remove the makeup, however the time constraints would make it difficult, so the lesson is, I guess, if you were set to appear before the court of law, it's probably best to not accept a role that makes you look like you belong in Arkham Asylum. Number 17. Robin was supposed to already be there. Upon release, Batman Forever's big gimmick was the fact that they were finally adding Robin, Batman's young protege and sidekick, into the mix. But had Batman Returns stuck to its original script, Robin's appearance wouldn't have come as a surprise. That's because that script initially featured Robin as played by Marlon Wayans. When Sam Hamm and Daniel Waters were brought onto the project, though, the character was the first to go. In fact, Waters went as far as describing Robin as the, quote, most worthless character in the world, particularly in a Batman story, you know, one about the ultimate loner. Having a sidekick, the writers felt anyway, cheapened the whole affair, and when it came down to a new director making Batman Forever, Wayans ultimately missed out on the role for the sequel, but still received a hefty paycheck. Number 16. Val Kilmer and Jim Carrey were BFFs. Despite all the chaos behind the scenes of Batman Forever between the studio, director, actors, and writers, one genuine friendship managed to form. Both Jim Carrey and Val Kilmer had both recently lost their fathers and had similar backgrounds, growing up in families under dire financial situations. Their shared bond apparently helped them through an otherwise difficult shoot. Number 15. On the other hand, Tommy Lee Jones hated Jim Carrey. Perhaps the most famous and funny story behind Batman Forever came from Jim Carrey years after the fact. It turns out that all of those crowd shots of Tommy Lee Jones at award shows where he just sits silently with a face like a smacked ass as the host tries to tell a joke were not an intentional part of the act. In fact, offset stories range from requesting a waitress to be fired for politely acknowledging his career to Carey's now infamous tale. So the story goes that Jim spotted Tommy Lee at a restaurant before filming began and thought he'd do the honourable thing and introduce himself to his co-star. The two embraced, at which point Jones turned to him and said, quote, "I hate you, I cannot sanction your buffoonery." End quote. Seriously, he just deadass said this to him in a restaurant. The man's ridiculous. Allegedly, this relationship didn't liven up once the shooting was underway either. Number 14, Val Kilmer lived up to his difficult reputation. Val Kilmer gained an intriguing reputation at the height of his career, with some vouching for him and others detailing some pretty difficult behaviour. In 1995, for instance, after filming the last of his scenes on the island of Dr. Moreau, director John Frankenheimer bellowed, quote, "Now get that off my set." Schumacher was apparently no fan either, though he does admit that the actor delivered a solid performance despite his actions. In an interview, Schumacher explained, quote, "I didn't say Val was difficult to work with on Batman Forever, I said he was psychotic," end quote. He never actually explained what he really meant by that, but there's a reason that Kilmer didn't return for the sequel. Number 13, Dick Grayson already had Nightwing in mind. After discovering the Batcave, it was a foregone conclusion that Dick Grayson's lust for revenge against Two-Face for the death of his family and eventual role as Batman's lackey was going to drive the film into its final act. But where would Grayson go after he got his just cause? Continue under Batman's tutelage or go off on his own? Well, it turns out, without even realizing it, the supposedly teenage boy, the actor was 25 at the time, already knew what he was going to do. When spouting out potential names for his alter ego, he passes over Nightwing, a name the adult Grayson adopts years later in his crime-fighting career. Number 12. As much as Chris O'Donnell wanted to drive the Batmobile, he kinda sucked at it. Everyone interested in superheroes dreams of driving the Batmobile, and the thing about the movies is sometimes kids with that dream could actually grow up and make it a reality. In Batman Forever, the actual car though was typically manned by stunt drivers, but still Chris O'Donnell was insistent that he get a turn at the wheel when Robin takes it out for a joyride. As one can imagine though, this car is as impractical as it looks, and O'Donnell didn't really know how to handle it. Consequently, almost right away, he crashed it. Still, crashing the Batmobile is a pretty good story to tell at parties. Number 11. Will SHORTZ created the RIDDLE'S riddles. As he is wont to do, the Riddler taunts Batman throughout the film, mailing him riddles that inevitably lead to his true identity. But the riddles themselves were actually quite complex, at least compared to the ones in the Batman TV series, and that's no accident. In fact, they were written and designed by Will SHORTZ, the then crossword editor of the New York Times. Number 10. Val Kilmer was literally in a Batcave when he learned of the role. There are some happy accidents that happen on superhero movies. For one, a director with the name Mark Webb making a Spider-Man movie, which even 10 years later I still can't get over. A similar coincidence is tied to Batman Forever though. At one point, Val Kilmer was in Africa doing research for his next picture, The Ghost and the Darkness. The film, directed by Stephen Hopkins, is the sort of true story of two man-eating lions who attacked countless railroad workers who were linking Uganda to the Indian Ocean. So when he was approached for the role, he was literally in a Batcave at the time. He accepted the offer immediately before even bothering to see the script. Number 9. Believe it or not, Joel Schumacher actually wanted to go darker. Joel Schumacher is often credited, or blamed depending on who you ask, for the neon, strobe-lit, goofy tone of his two entries in the Batman franchise. However, the director initially intended to stay true to Burton's much darker vision. That's because it was actually the producers and studio that pushed for a lighter, more kid-friendly tone after a disastrous time trying to sell Batman Returns to family-friendly advertisers. By the time he got around to Batman and Robin then, Schumacher's heart wasn't in this type of filmmaking at all, and his last-ditch effort to pitch a dark sequel to that movie once it bombed similarly fell on deaf ears. Number 8. When Burton was still involved, so was the Scarecrow. Once upon a time, Tim Burton originally planned to make Batman Forever, a title both he and Schumacher hated, by the way. I mean, Schumacher even likened the Forever part to some dumb crap you put on a t-shirt, not a movie. So, with that in mind, Burton actually aimed to call it Batman Continues, and intended it to be the closure of a trilogy, each exploring a different theme surrounding the character. His first film would deal with coping with tragedy, the second with redemption, and the third would probe overcoming fear after a loss. So naturally, Burton would include the Scarecrow, the villainous doctor who used his fear toxin to send his victims into a panicked frenzy. This wasn't just some kind of concept either. Burton actually knew who he wanted for the role, and it was none other than the voice of Chucky, Brad Dourif. Number 7. They bought out Billy D. Williams. Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, has been a staple of the comics and film franchise since his first appearance as the District Attorney of Gotham. He was played by Billy D. Williams, who signed on for the sequel and was part of the first first script. In fact, it was supposed to be Dent, not Christopher Walken's Max Schreck, who would be shocked by Catwoman's taser at the end of Batman Returns, causing half of his face to be horrifically scarred. By the time Batman Forever was in production, the studio didn't want to include Williams though, so they bought out his contract and recast him with Jones, who had just won an Oscar for The Fugitive. It sucks that Billy D never got to be Two-Face in live action, but hey, at least he did manage to reprise the role in the Lego Batman movie. Number 6. Schumacher wanted Nicole Kidman for Poison Ivy. Superhero sequels, particularly after Spider-Man 3, are notorious targets of derision from fans for being overstuffed with villains. But the history of adding in more bad guys for the hero to go up against stretches back much further than that, and Joel Schumacher initially wanted Poison Ivy to show up in Batman Forever before she finally did in Batman and Robin. In a slight change though, he wanted Nicole Kidman's character to be Ivy, but everyone else felt that 2 villains were enough for the picture. As a result, Kidman played Batman's love interest and psychiatrist Chase Meriden, a character never part of the mythology before or since. Number 5. Bob Kane's wife is in it. 13 minutes into Tim Burton's Batman, reporter Alexander Knox walks by a cartoonist's desk in the newsroom and mocks a cartoon sketch of Batman in a pinstriped suit. It's a cute in-joke as the cartoonist is actually co-creator of Batman, Bob Kane. Still respectful of its history, Schumacher included a similar cameo for Kane's wife in Batman Forever. Here she plays Gotsby Gertie, the irritating reporter desperate to get a few words from the now famous Edward Nygma during a gala where he premieres The Box. She even reprises the role in Batman and Robin too. Number 4. Bob Kane liked Val Kilmer the most. Bob Kane lived a long and storied life in the comic world and witnessed the Batman create the Bat-2C, wear an anti-shark belt, have bat nipples, kill many thugs, and inadvertently lead to the deaths of the Joker, the Penguin, and Two-Face. Of all the Batmen doing these things on screen though, it was actually Val Kilmer who he said was the best of the best when it came to live action performances. Having died in 1998, the last actor he saw don the cape and cowl was George Clooney. Number 3. It led to Jim Carrey covering the Beatles. Show business makes strange bedfellows. After watching Carrey mug his way through the role, legendary Beatles producer George Martin actually approached him with the intent that the actor record a cover of the Beatles' I Am the Walrus for the tribute album that was in the process of being put together. Jim Carrey, being Jim Carrey, accepted immediately, and it wasn't long before he was in the studio. Admittedly, it is difficult to imagine any actor refusing a request from the guy who produced the Beatles, but even then it is a fine performance in its own right, injected with just a smidge of Carrey's own brand of wackiness. So yeah, once you're finished here, get that thing YouTubed. Number 2. Steve Martin was offered the role of the Riddler. The role of the Riddler almost felt tailor-made for someone like Jim Carrey, so it's somewhat of a surprise that the studio actually struggled to cast it properly. Before the right light went off in the right head, they offered the role to comedian, actor, writer, poet, and playwright Steve Martin. It's one of those wouldn't it have been interesting facts, and it even made vague sense, given that Martin's previous work, The Man with Two Brains, had his character deal with mind control / swapping like the Riddler. But at the time, Martin was going through a divorce from his wife and actress Victoria Tennant. Honestly, this film should have just been titled Batman Divorced given the number of relationships that fell apart during production, and his friend John Candy had just died of a heart attack. Needless to say, Martin wasn't up to the task and understandably turned the role down. Number 1. Two-Face actually survived. I know, right? I know you just heard this title and thought, look, Josh, don't be daft. How can Two-Face, the man who fell 100 feet into a giant pit of spikes and was then last seen sinking deeper into the water on an island with no escape, actually be alive? Well, truthfully, I do not know how he survived, but that was the intention. On the DVD commentary of the movie, Joel Schumacher confirmed that Harvey wasn't killed at the end. Some have wondered if including the character's costume in Batman and Robin could have been further confirmation of this fact, even if they couldn't get Tommy Lee Jones back in the flesh. So that's our list. What do you guys think down in the comments below? How many of these facts did you already know about Batman Forever? And are there any cool ones that I missed off here? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.